Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Books and Beyond with Bound, Season 4, where we interview some of the finest authors in South Asia and find out what makes them tick. We are editors, podcasters, and storytellers, and through Bound, we help you tell stories and share them with the world. So let's dive into the episode. Today's episode was very, very special to me because it's all about dogs. And I know you're thinking, how are dogs and books connected? And I'll come to that. But if you don't know already, I'm a huge dog person. I have a very cute Cocker Spaniel called Simba, who I've also made the mascot of Bound. And today I'm speaking to another dog lover. Her name is Hemali Sodhi. She's the founder of a suitable agency and she's had a long and amazing career in publishing. But her first love is dogs. And the story of how she came to even love dogs is very interesting, which is in the book. So the book is called The Book of Dogs, and it is an anthology full of essays across formats, photo essays, personal essays, poems, all kinds of things. And all the essays are centered around dogs. And the writers who are writing these essays are amazing. We have Ruskin Bond writing about a dog that his grandmom used to own in the hills. You have Jerry Pinto. You have Soni Tarapuravella. You have animal activists also coming together. So it's a real treat. It's beautifully curated and it's not boring. Even if you're not a pet lover, you're going to really enjoy this book because every essay is a different experience and it's an immersive kind of experience, and it really is so heartwarming, because who doesn't like speaking about dogs? So I spoke to Hemali because I really wanted to find out how she even came up with this idea, how she worked with these very accomplished writers like Ruskin Bond, for example, and how she worked with them to craft these stories, how she even approached this anthology. And what I found very interesting is that, being a literary agent herself, she actually employed another agent to get this book published. So this conversation is one of my most favorites. We speak about our dogs, we speak about all the writers that she knows, their dog stories, and how she put this together. Please do send your own pet stories to me. I would love to know a little bit more about you and your pet stories. This episode and this book has sparked so many conversations for me, and I would love to feature it on our blog, Jotted. So if you have a fun pet story in any format, even from the point of view of your pet, you can write to me at connect@boundindia.com. But for now, let's get into the kennel and let's go play with some of the cutest dogs. Hi, Hemali. Welcome to Books and Beyond.
Thank you, Tara. Wonderful to be here.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk to you today because I know that you are a passionate dog lover, and you've been liking all of my tweets and posts about my dog.
Yes, and I hope he's feeling better.
He is. That's something I also want to talk to you about. Getting a dog from a breeder. We don't know, but
Yeah, yeah,
they have a lot of issues. But
yeah.
before that, for our guests, I'm very excited to introduce Hemali. She's written this amazing book. It's called The Book of Dog. If you're a pet lover, you will really, really enjoy this book. And even if you're not a pet lover, it's an amazing book because it's just so heartwarming. For me, I felt like it was just an escape. Simba's my first dog. I know your first dog was also named Simba. It was a place I could sort of go to feel at home, to feel warm, and sort of forget about all your problems. And I think that's what dogs do for us. So before we get into all of that, I want to ask you, you work in publishing, and I read in an interview that you've had this idea of doing a collection on dog stories for quite a while. Something changed in the pandemic that triggered you sort of to go ahead with it. So I want to know, why at that stage did you not go ahead with the collection, and what changed for you that made you decide, okay, now is the time to do it? Obviously the pandemic, was it something else also that you're seeing in the industry? Because I know there's a lot of resurgence of pet stories that's happening now as well.
So actually what really happened, Tara, was I had thought about an idea around a collection of dog stories, simply because the first dog in my life, Simba, he changed everything. He was a transformative experience for me. It was literally life changing. I started viewing the world differently. And because I come from publishing, as you said, I think our expression in terms of how we want to talk about our experiences is in the form of books. That's what you think of as the first thing. So I did think about the idea about, I'd say, 2016 or 17, so about 5 years ago. And then what really happened was inertia, nothing else. I think the idea just kind of sat there for a while. And then what really happened in the pandemic was that I addressed that a bit in the introduction, which is that we were actually at home in this completely altered world, frightening world. You didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, if you remember, the first few months, especially of the lockdown, were just so horrifying. And there were our dogs who were so delighted to spend that extra time with us. And I did, and I know a lot of my friends did. We derived a lot of comfort from our dogs at that point. Here was this companion. Here was your family member who was completely unaffected by everything that was happening around, and it was just such a heartwarming but also such a comforting experience. And I think that's what really made me think that now is the time that I should really sit down and do something about that idea. And I think what also happens when you become a dog parent is that a lot of your conversations with others tend to be around their dogs and dog stories and their individual experiences. So that's when I actually sat down, and I remember this was, I think, in March 2020, when I started writing to people, some of whom kind of knew that I had been thinking about this. And that's when the idea kind of took shape.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. As a dog parent, I can spend hours just talking about dogs with my friends. And I remember, because this is my first dog actually, and he's 6 years old. So,
Oh, okay.
I'd never had a dog when I was growing up. But I remember being around people who had dogs, and they would constantly be chatting about their dogs, and I get so bored. And now I'm one of those people. Um, but before we go into more about the concept of the book and all of those things, I loved, I was so interested because, you are someone who said that you were actually afraid of dogs. And I know a lot of people like that. So one of my friends was also really, really scared of dogs, and her sibling sort of surprised her with a dog. I don't know if that's the best thing to do to somebody. Now she's just in love with that dog. So
Yeah.
I want to know, what is your story? How did you sort of go from being so afraid of this animal to now curating a book about dogs? What about the dog captured your heart?
Everything, I think for me, the fact is that yes, I was a fairly timid kind of child. I was afraid of not just dogs, I was afraid of everything. And it wasn't that I didn't like dogs. There's a difference between not liking something and just being afraid of it because you don't know better. I wasn't even bitten or anything. I think it was just this fear, irrational fear that I had. And because my family was also not one which had dogs, that opportunity to be around a dog and understand the dynamic didn't really arise. um, and then I got married into a family of dog lovers, and so we had started having this conversation around, let's get a dog. And I think my first few conversations was me being completely petrified of the idea, because I just didn't know better. And I think I have to say that it was the most amazing experience when Simba, our first dog, came, because he was actually the ideal dog. He was calm, he was gentle, he was very loving. And that, I can't even say it slowly changed me. It was pretty quick. I think the minute Simba came, we just developed this bond and this relationship. And I think that is one of the most profound relationships I've ever had in my life. And so I think what really also happened to me was the other extreme, where I plunged into this whole world of, dog stories. And I became kind of slightly obsessed with this whole new phenomenon, which I actually hadn't been privy to earlier. And so I remember having a lot of conversations with a lot of writers as well, about their dog stories, and that's when the idea sort of slowly germinated. But to answer your question, yes, I think it was the fact that it was Simba. He came as a 6-week old pup. He was this yellow golden ball of fluff. And our first dog did come from a breeder. We didn't know better. And we'll talk about that later. But he was just perfect. He was perfection. And I think he just changed so much about the way I viewed other species and viewed dogs.
It does change you. Even for me, when I got my first dog, we didn't, and the thing is, you don't know anything about how to take care of them.
Yeah.
So it really is like your first baby. You make a lot of mistakes. As an editor, you said that you started talking to writers and you always had this idea. But what I want to know is that, how far did your vision for this book extend before you started reaching out to writers? Did you already sort of know how many essays you want? Did you have a fleshed out concept? Did you sort of know the balance of, essays between writers and between activists, the type of essays that you wanted, or was it sort of more free flowing than that?
So there were a couple of things that I knew I wanted to do, but actually it was largely free flowing in terms of conceptualizing it, or in terms of what the actual stories would be or what the genres would be. What I did know was that apart from the stories that I had exchange with writers like Shobha Day or Ashwin Sanghi or Gulzar Saab and Pali, or Ruskin. I think what I did want to include was some stories by animal welfare activists, because I think that those people, they are evolved. I think to do what they do day in and day out requires a great degree of fortitude. Requires I really think that you've got to be of a special breed to be able to work in animal welfare with its heartbreaks and its difficulties. So I did want to include a few stories around those, but also not because of anything else, but because of how rescue can also be a transformative experience, both for the dog and for the person who's rescuing the dog, or actually if you are rescued by a dog. I did also want to include some voices, new voices who I knew were dog parents but hadn't necessarily written before, and I was keen to see what their expression would take. So the initial list was around 20-25 people, I'll say, which was a lot of writers and some animal activists, and one or two new voices. But after that, what was interesting was how the universe grew. People started recommending other people. Someone said, "Have you heard about this one story?" A couple of writers actually wrote in saying, which is really sweet, saying, "We believe you're putting together an anthology. Do you want to include this story?" And so, what really emerged was this very eclectic, very diverse, very wide ranging collection of essays. There are 45 now. And also, interestingly, they took their own form. So, while you have essays, you have poems, you have photo essays, you have graphic narratives, you've got a piece on history, dogs in World War, you've got mythology, you've got food, you've got a dog penning a haiku. So it just became this really interesting being of different kinds of stories. I think underlying all of the stories was really one thing, which was love. And also the other thing that I did know right from the beginning was that I wanted all royalties to go to animal welfare. Everyone was on board with that. I think that's a testament to dogs, really, not to me or anything else. The fact that everyone said, yes, let's do this, let's actually divert, or let's donate all royalties to animal welfare. So that's how it came about. And it took around, I think, a year and a half to curate all the stories, put them together, make changes, make edits.
It just got me thinking about, so there must be, so about all the dog stories that I know and all the dog stories that I want to say too. It's one of those things that it just starts a sort of movement in a way. I
Yeah,
also want to know, I love the fact that there was so much variety, because as a reader that's what you want. Otherwise, to be honest, when I first got the book, I was sort of a little bit apprehensive, because I thought, okay, maybe it's story after story about how people love their dogs, which could get
yeah,
repetitive. But what I
yeah,
really liked was, you have Jerry Pinto talking about writing from the dog's point of view.
yeah,
You have a recipe about a dog snack.
yeah.
You have those pictures on Marine Drive, which Sony Tarapura took. And honestly, I have taken the exact same pictures of the same dog. I mean, not as well as she has, but those dogs exist on Marine Drive and they're pretty famous. So if our listeners are listening, they can go check it out. They're very, very cute. So I wanted to know, did you sort of, I know it was free flowing, but was there any sort of brief that you gave these writers? Or what was your level of intervention when it came to curating these stories and when you got them back?
So it was a discussion in a lot of cases. In some cases, I knew that. So with Shobha Day, I knew I wanted to I wanted her to talk about Gongli, because I'd heard those stories, and a couple of anecdotes that she relates are really, really funny. But also, it's about Gongli and her special relationship. In some cases, like for instance, with Mahesh Rao, I really admire him as a writer, and I wanted him to write a piece. And he said, "Look, but I haven't had a dog because there's been a medical condition in the family, so I haven't been able to have a dog." And I said, "Okay, but if you were to think about the dogs of your childhood, or if you were to talk about what it is or what it would have been to have a presence in your life, what form would that take?" And from there he said, "Okay, let me talk about these three dogs." So in a lot of cases the discussions went far deeper. With Sarnath, again, it was about, he said, "Okay, but what do you want me to write about?" So then we said, let's talk about the story as a graphic narrative from a dog's point of view again. So then Shehzada Ozu came about. But to answer your question, there were some stories where I knew they'd make good additions, not necessarily in an essay form, like Divya Dugar's piece on traveling with her three dogs on a train. Now, I find that really fascinating because she's actually done so many train journeys with her dogs. And the funny part of that story is that in a train, you're allowed only two dogs, but she has three. So she trained her third dog to kind of hide under the duvet every time the ticket collector came. So I thought it would be great to have that. So I think in a lot of cases, it was a discussion around what that form could take. And I'm glad you said that you like the variety, because I think that that also is something that really worked, in the sense that no two stories are alike. I think having essay after essay after essay, I would have loved it, to be honest. I mean, I love many stories around dogs, but I think the break actually, and the kind of unexpectedness of what the next story would be, is what works.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, I was going to ask you about Mahesh Rao because I found that one very, very interesting.
Yeah,
He doesn't have a dog, but he's speaking about all these cartoon dogs.
yeah.
And it made me look at Scooby Doo and Snoopy and all of these dog characters that we grew up with in a completely different light. So it's very interesting to know, how much of an editorial intervention there actually was, where you were getting in these stories, you were discussing what format they could take. Sometimes you're going writer first. There's a lot of these things going around where there's a terminology, pet parents, people treating their dogs as their children, spoiling their dogs to the T. So I want to know from you, what are your guilty secrets when it comes to raising your dogs?
There wouldn't be secrets anymore then, right? Honestly, I think there are no hard and fast rules in terms of how every dog that we've had, and we've had several now, has their own unique personality. And there is, again, in our home, there is a lot of love. Every dog has a special place. I think there are some things that we won't do, which is that we don't believe in chaining dogs. We don't believe in any form of punishment, which, is, I mean, to me, any harsh punishment is, it's just not on. Of course, there is discipline, and there has to be. Dogs are like children, right? I mean, you just have to have that relationship with them, build that trust with them. Discipline comes in, but I would much rather that it is something that is based on our individual interactions and the dog's personality. So we've had boxers, for instance, who have been, like, they are the most delightful but completely insane creatures. So I mean, our interactions with them were more of a gentle but firm kind of nature. Simba was perfect, as I said. We've had rescue dogs who come with baggage, and there's a lot of emotional baggage there, and so each has to be treated with a lot of love and a lot of patience. And I think what people also sometimes forget is that every space has to be respected. The dog also has moods, has their own space, and you've got to respect that. I think otherwise, really, no hard and fast rules. Our dogs are, I have to say, it's their home first.
So how many dogs do you currently have in your home?
In the home at the moment, three, but we
Do they
have a
all get
dog.
along with each other?
Sometimes they don't. Also, because two of them have come from a slightly harsh background of rescue, so it's taken
Hmm.
a while to for them to get rehabilitated. But then we also have a lot of dogs in the street who've adopted us, who come and say hello, or come for a
Yeah.
snack, or come for water, or just hang around in the compound.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, my cousins who live in Delhi also sort of they have three dogs in their house, and they have two or three dogs that live right outside the gate of their house,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
those dogs are slowly inching their way in day by day.
yeah. Yeah,
But I think in Bombay, with the flat size and all of those things, one
yeah.
dog is more than enough. And also, the dogs need to run around and have outdoors, which I do feel bad that my dog is missing out on. But anyway, that's a separate story. So I love so many of the stories in the book, and I was very excited to see Ruskin Bond's story. Obviously, any literature lover would be excited to see that, and I found it very poignant. He talks about his dog who's named Crazy, and how this dog used to follow his grandmother around, and when the grandmother passed away, how upset he was, and how he really felt that sense of loss. And it really made me sort of think about and empathize with how dogs sense our emotions.
Yeah.
And then one day he sort of sensed the spirit of the grandmother, and he was back to his usual happy self. And for me, that was a very, very touching story, and very reflective of our relationship with dogs. Can you narrate one of your favorite stories for our listeners?
From the book, there are so many. I mean, it's like picking your favorite,
Yeah.
all 45. So some of the stories were those which surprised me with their unexpectedness, and some of the stories I thought were, again, I'm not going to pick a favorite, but I'm just going to say the ones that really spoke to me were, so there's Sean Morton, who talks about her dog who was seized under breed specific legislation. And this is a completely barbaric law, which says four breeds, and pit bulls are one of them, or pit bulls are the overarching breed. And these four breeds are banned. So if people are found having this dog or housing this dog, the dog is very often seized. And if they can't prove that he's not a pit bull, they're put to sleep. Which when I first heard this, and this was about 12 years ago that I first heard about this law, and we were talking about, there was a campaign that I was part of where a dog in Ireland was seized. And so it became this global campaign. Anyway, so when I first heard about this, I couldn't believe that something like that would exist. I mean, how do you actually take a dog, use a tape measure, say he fits a certain specification, and put the dog to sleep? So that story about her dog, and Alex, and I know Sean, she's a friend of mine, and I see her photos with Alex. I think that really touched me, because Alex has also been given a second chance, right? He was seized and he was exempted, and it just shows you how a dog can flourish and how a dog can thrive and how a dog can be the most loving creature if he's given the right environment. So there are stories which have actually um, been very, very personal. But again, I think picking any one story is very difficult for me because I really love all of them. Whether it's Gulzar Saab's story about Pali, his favorite dog, who's a boxer, and Pali's not around anymore. But how he and Pali used to sit in this companionable silence every evening and observe the world. I think there are some stories which are really, really, which really touch you. Naomi Barton's story, for instance, about how she was going through a tough period in her life, and how when she adopted a dog, or when the dog adopted her, how that changed, and how they slowly came to trust each other and view the world differently. But again, there are lots of stories which are very funny. Ashok Ferry's story I love because it's just it's just so lovely. And again, there are lots of stories which touch you in many different ways. Menaka Gandhi's story, it's a very different side of Menaka Gandhi that you actually see, because it's just so, there's so much of, it's so raw and it's so tender that you don't even know how you're going to edit something like that, because it just seems like an intrusion. It's that voice is so raw. So yeah, the book is full of these stories which have touched me and which have kind of left an impact in many different ways.
Yeah, I didn't expect to be so moved by the book, because I thought it'll be sort of, it is, it's light, it's funny, it's all of these things, but it really left me sort of, it was moving. It was sort of like heartbreaking also in a way, and it made me think, because this is my first dog.
Yeah.
A lot of the stories are also about loss, and made me think about that, and all the things that are associated with dogs. And what you said about Menaka Gandhi is very interesting, because while dogs are obviously the center stage in this book, we are also talking about the dog lovers. And
Yes.
what these stories are doing is they're showing another side of people that us regular people, we don't have access to. So, for example, people like Rajdeep Sardesai or Ashwin
Yes.
Sanghi, these figures, these stories sort of humanize them more in a way, or gave us a window into their lives, which is a little more personal, a little more intimate, a new sort of avenue into
Yeah.
these figures. So, was that sort of intentional, and what has been the response to that?
I think you're absolutely right. A lot of it has been a sort of a revelation into the writers that we know and read, but don't necessarily know on a personal level. But for me, I think because the conversation was really around their dogs, and I knew that most of the people in the book are dog lovers, I was kind and consummate storytellers. I I was delighted by the stories that came in, but also I'd heard some of these stories before. Like for instance, Rajdeep's Nemo has been such a well-known figure in Delhi, but hearing Rajdeep talk about Nemo and the fact that Nemo's not around anymore, I found really particularly heartrending and also very touching, because there's this bit where he talks about how when at the end of the day, when the house is empty and everyone's gone and there's just him and there's Nemo, there's that understanding. And I thought that was just so lovely. It was such a profound thing to read. I think for a lot of readers, it is an aspect into their writers that they didn't know. It's a peek into their life. And there's a tenderness to all of them. There's this tenderness that you see when writers are talking about their dogs. So I think that was really lovely.
Yeah, that tenderness is so rare, and that I think is very moving. So, you said that there were stories pouring in, which is very exciting. So, I want to know, were there any stories that you had to leave out? And if there were, could you tell us one of them?
I didn't leave out any of the stories simply because I felt like every story or every anecdote or every account of a person and their dog is something I respect. I mean, it's a relationship more than anything else. Who am I to sit and judge and say this is good or this is not good enough? I think the essence of the story is the person's relationship with their dog. We did work on some stories a bit more, not because they weren't great, but because you wanted it to be a certain way in terms of fitting into an anthology. Because a lot of the writers were actually writers who hadn't written before. Um, but having said that, strangely and curiously enough, I didn't leave out any story. I just felt like it wasn't for me to sit there and judge about whether this story is good or this story is not. And I think when you actually look at all the 45 now, you feel like that's why everything is so special, because some of them are just so raw and so personal. But that's what they are, that's the relationship. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So I also want to know, so many stories about dogs. Was there anything that you realized or you learned about issues around dogs that you didn't know before you curated this story? So, we were talking about breeding, and it just again brought it all back to me. It's my first dog, so we got it from a breeder, and we didn't know all of the problems, and
Yeah,
we didn't know sort of that breeders don't actually like animals, don't actually
yeah,
like dogs.
it's a business.
And it's a business, and the conditions that these dogs are sort of like put in, the health issues in the interbred. So my dog has a lot of health issues
Yeah.
because of that. And these are things I realized after getting the dog, which maybe if I had read your book, I would have probably known, though I don't regret my dog one minute, of course. But what did you learn that you didn't know after doing this book?
I think a lot of the some of the issues addressed in the book were things that I had already wanted to address, whether it was about the fact that more strays need to be adopted, more indies need to be adopted. Like I said, the essay around breed specific legislation, but also I was very keen also to talk about. So Minakshi does this story on dog racing, and she's a very gentle person, so she puts it gently, but if you talk to me about it, I get very angry. So I mean, when we were doing the essay, I was saying, Minakshi, no, but we have to say that it's actually not a good thing. And she understands that, but she's a very kind, forgiving person. For her, that relationship, the fact that she rescues greyhounds who've been retired, was the most important part. But I think what we were also hoping to addressed with this book, not hitting people on the head with it, but addressing it through the different stories, were these different issues. So whether it's about, how many of the dogs, indie dogs, require homes, or about what animal welfare activists actually do, or about breeders, which is something that I address a bit in my introduction. I think all that sort of comes about. In terms of other things that I learned from the book, I think I won't pinpoint one, but I would say that one of the things that, and I don't feel like saying this to you because you're a new dog parent, but one of the things that dog parents are aware of all the time is the idea of, or the fact that there probably is loss sometime in the next few years. And that can be extremely difficult. There are ways that you can address it. You can either let it completely overtake your life, or you can say, I'm going to learn from my dog and live in the moment and enjoy the moment and make sure that each day with my dog is a special day. But I think the learning was really that even if there is loss, and there is a lot of loss, the book does address that, the love stays. That that special relationship that you will have with that dog will always stay with you. And I think that was something that was also reinforced. But a lot of the stories are actually really fun, joyous, live in the moment stories. So
I
yeah,
was going to ask you about the loss thing as well, because being a new dog parent, obviously that's something that I have not experienced, but it is something that that does scare me. But reading a book did not sort of like make it worse or anything. In fact, it was sort of done in such a beautiful way that you appreciate your dog, as you said, more every day, and a lot of funny stories as well.
yeah,
Cyrus Brocha's commandments,
his commandments are
just
just,
hilarious.
they
Yeah.
are so good. I mean, I just
Yeah,
love Cyrus's piece. It's
yeah,
hilarious. It's hilarious, but it also tells you some truths, behind all that
exactly.
frivolity. Is saying some very important things, and that's why I really love that piece.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to come to this question. So Shobha Day's dog,
Yes.
Gongli, who's become Ganguly, and that's something that we experience all the time. When I was
Yeah.
naming, I know Simba is a very common name, but it's easy to say in India, But in this book, we come across so many dog names. So there's Gongli, who's become Ganguly. There is Django, Shikhari, lots of dog names. What do you think that way we name our dogs says about us?
Okay, this is a tough one. Only because a lot of the dogs that we've had have come with their own names because they are rescues, and we didn't want to change the names because it wasn't fair. The dog was used to that name. But I think, interestingly, when you see a lot of the dogs on the streets, they have all these Indianized names. So we have someone called, I'm sorry, Motu, but she's a chubby dog, so she's called Motu by everyone. And so there are different names. I think, look, I know people say, why do dogs have these standardized names? I really don't see anything wrong with that. I think, I mean, if you see the book, there are so many individual, some quirky names, and that's fine as long as those are names which are given with affection and are pronounceable. That's okay. So our dogs came with their own names, like I said. The ones that we named were the two boxers that we had. And Jack Sparrow was named because he was this white boxer with one eyebrow, and he couldn't be called anything else. He looked like a pirate. And his brother was called Carl. But yeah, I think, as long as a name is given with affection, as they say, what's in a name?
Agreed. Agreed. So I named my dog because my grandparents had a dog called Simba, and he was a very docile, sweet little thing. I said, okay, I will name this dog Simba so that he becomes exactly like original Simba.
Yeah.
And turns out he's nothing like him at all. He's very naughty, very boisterous, not calm, but they're all lovable in their own ways.
Yeah.
Um, so another thing that I really was thinking about is the order of the stories. Because in an anthology, when you're curating something, the way you put together something is very important. Obviously, the introduction, and then how does your reader start? So the first story, which was Ashok Ferry, the Sri Lankan author, is very, 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 very funny and loving account. So was there any logic? What was the logic that you used, sort of when putting these stories together into a particular order, if any?
I think I didn't want to put them thematically because I think that would have been a bit predictable. If you're talking about puppies and you're talking about adoption and then you're talking about loss, I think that then makes it exactly the kind of book that we were talking about earlier. I think the beauty and the unexpectedness of the book is really the fact that there are so many stories where you're suddenly reading about maybe something sad, and then the next story will be something that is about this completely insane dog. And there's this unexpectedness to what you'll read next. So I think for me, it was important to phase it now not by theme, but by how I'd like to read the stories, which is I wouldn't know what to expect next, except that there's going to be another delightful dog and another delightful story next, and it could take any form. So, for instance, you're reading something, and then suddenly you'll come across Arunawa's dog Tingmo, who's penned this haiku, and I thought that's just so delightful. You're like reading you're reading something serious, and then a haiku pops up. So I think it was very much like life with a dog can have many unexpected moments, and no day is the same. I thought the book should kind of reflect that. It should throw up these really wonderful surprises.
Yeah, it does do that, and also it's fun because you can sort of also, you don't have to read in order, so you can
Exactly.
sort of dip into it, pick out a few stories, come back to it.
Yeah.
But the first story is always very important one. So why Ashok Ferry? It was a lovely story, but wanted to know, why that story first.
I think because it's a great initiation into the book. The fact that here is this person who, and I love the vein of the story, the voice of the story where he's being this, he's being mock upset, but he's really not. He's really indulgent, and he gives up. He starts by saying, okay, why are we having so many dogs? And then in the end, he does have that many dogs, and that's it. That's life. That's what the house becomes. And I thought that was a perfect initiation into how you actually enter the world of dogs, how I entered the world of dogs. You don't know what to expect. There's this, okay, do we really have to? There's slight resignation in his story, and then that's it, the dogs take over your life. So I thought that was like a nice, also it's, I like the tone of it. It's light, but it also is profound in a lot of ways. So I thought that was the perfect initiation into what was to follow.
Very interesting. So, obviously, this book, any pet parent and any animal lover, not even dog lover, anyone who loves pets, they will really respond to this. So, what I want to know is what kind of responses have you been getting from your readers? Have your readers been writing in with any dog stories? And has this book started any conversations around pets or animals of any kind?
The wonderful thing is that it has. So just the other day, I got an email from a gentleman who's 83 years old who said he had dogs, but now he doesn't, and his companion is his neighbor's dog, and he said he was so touched by this that he was going to go and make a donation to the animal welfare charities listed in the book. There are three, and I thought that was just so lovely. I think there are people who write in saying, I remember one or two reviews said that even if you're not a dog lover, by the time you're midway through the book, you'll probably start looking at dogs differently. And I think to me, that is the most rewarding thing. The fact that you actually make something that is so lovely, so relatable to others. But what's also been interesting is we've had conversations. I did this very nice interaction at the Welfare for Stray Dogs in Bombay, run by Abod Aras, and the conversation there was just so delightful, where people knew about volunteering, they knew about how to come and help in a shelter. And I thought that those conversations are really the ones that we wanted to also initiate, along with the fact that, of course, dogs are the best and you must have dogs. And of course, every family should have a dog, but also some of the issues that we talk about. And those conversations have been really, really good. We've been getting a lot of messages from people saying that they understand an aspect better, or they understand about breeders better, or just the joy of getting, of I think one of the most beautiful things, and something that I wasn't privy to, unfortunately, is a child growing up with a dog. And when people turn around and say, you've made us think differently, and we're getting a dog to be a companion to our daughter or us. And I think that's really lovely. So, yes, I think the responses have been really rewarding.
I'm so glad about that. And that brings me to my next question. There's so much talk about what a dog can do for us. A dog loves us unconditionally. Dogs are the best. But what can we do for a dog?
So much. I think, and I'm not just talking about the dogs that we have. I think there is just so much that we can help with, whether it's issues around helping adopt strays or spread information. So, a lot of the times you hear about conflict between resident welfare associations and dog feeders. I think there is just so much that we can do to actually have a conversation around cohabiting a space. I think not enough of that happens. I think there is not enough information about what the rights of someone who wants to feed animals, for instance, should be. There are so many conversations around neutering. I think there is just so much that you can do if you put your mind to it. But it also begins with teaching kindness and teaching tolerance at a very elementary level, at home or at school. And now I'm getting into the preaching mode, but that's not the intention. But I think there is just so much that we can do to help dogs, whether it is actually volunteering at a shelter or spreading information about how to responsibly feed dogs. There is that as well. Even for feeders, you have to have a sense of responsibility. There have to be designated areas, or how neutering is really important for stray dogs so that they don't populate more, and so then you don't have to worry about how all those dogs are going to find a home. I think those things are really important.
I found it very fascinating that because you're a literary agent, but for this book you also got another literary agent to represent you, and I found that juxtaposition interesting. So I want to know, what was it like for you on the other side of things now? The tables have switched and you are the talent. What was your experience?
It was really interesting. So when I started putting the book together, we hadn't launched a suitable agency. The book actually precedes that. But even if I had, I would still get an agent and I would still get Meeta at CIE, because Meeta is also a dog lover. And Meeta and I have had many conversations around her dogs. And I think a book like this has to be something that is personal to whoever's working on it, whether it's the agent or it's the editor. And Meeta was also really kind. I mean, when I said that this is going to be a project around charity and where all royalties are going to be donated, she said, okay, I mean, even I'm going to do that. I'm going to waive off my fee as well. So I think there has to be that understanding and that love for a project like that. It has also been an interesting learning process for me, in terms of getting the book published, because my background is in publishing. So before I was an agent, I was in publishing. But to be on the other side of the table is you view things kind of from the other lens, right? So whether it's about, okay, how's the book going to look, or the editorial conversations, or the marketing conversations, or the visibility conversations, it's been, I have to say, an interesting learning experience, and interesting in a good way. I think it's important to also understand the other side. That just makes you a bit more informed in what you do.
What
Been
is
great.
that one insight that you had, being on the other side of the table,
Now
that
you're going to
it
get me into trouble.
because a lot of our listeners are aspiring writers. So what is that sort of like one insight that you had into the mind of a writer? What a writer needs or wants that was then fulfilled by Meeta for you?
So there were several, to be honest, but I think what really made a difference for me was working with both an agent and an editor who were very invested in the subject. So it's not just, I mean, Indian publishing has many competent editors. It's not just that, but I think it's important for you and your agent and your publisher to have the same kind of vision for the book. And this, in that sense, is a slightly different book. It's an anthology. It's been launched during COVID. So, I mean, everything that I've done over the past few years, whether it's launching an agency or bringing out a book, has been during these COVID times. So everything has this kind of, it's unprecedented in a lot of ways, for me. But I think what really works is being on the same plane, and that, I think, makes a lot of difference, and that's what happened with both Meeta and the editor that I worked with.
And congratulations on launching a suitable agency. I love the
Thank you.
name. I'm sure you've heard that many times.
Thank you.
So, since I mentioned that a lot of our listeners are readers, but also aspiring writers, I want to ask you one question about suitable agency. So, why this agency now, and what kind of books are you looking for?
So, a suitable agency came about 2 years ago. It's going to be 2 years, in fact, in July. And before that, I was in publishing. I was in publishing for about 2 decades. And when I left publishing, I had taken a sabbatical. But I knew that books were just so fundamental to everything I do that it would be something around books. And so had conversations, thought about it. I think the idea of being with books, but actually looking at it from the other side, which is representing authors' interests and also finding the voices that we'd like to represent, was something that really resonated. When we started the agency, and I'm very lucky to have colleagues who work with me, who I've also worked with earlier, and they really are wonderful. I think when we started out, we did ask this question about what is it that we're looking for. And what we finally arrived at was that we really want to champion or represent or go out into the world with books that we want to be a part. We want to be a part of their life of. We have to love the books that we represent. So we said, okay, pretty much like the Book of Dog. As you can see, I don't have these plans. It's just let's do what we really love. And if we love it, and if we really, really go behind a book, I think we'll get the list that we want rather than saying, okay, let's do five fiction and 10 nonfiction and whatever poetry. That wasn't the way we viewed it. We were very lucky that when we launched, and even now, we get a lot of submissions. We are careful about the number of books that we represent at any given point, simply because we think that we would like to be invested in the entire trajectory, not just place a book with a publisher. That's really important. And I think what we really have is a very interesting list. So whether it's graphic or it's fiction or it's non-fiction or it's even children's books, we don't restrict the genre. We have rule that we will, and we have a few people now who also are with the agency who read manuscripts and we discuss them. We read and review every manuscript that comes to us. We have a set way in which proposals are sent. And if anyone feels passionately about it and wants to champion it, we take the book on. And then we work with the author closely in terms of whether it's editorial advice or it's how we want to pitch or who we think that book would really work with, or which editor would respond to it, because I think all of us come from a background in publishing, so we know the landscape a bit. And here we are. I think we now have about 45 books. Every book is a book that one of us or all of us is very, very proud to be associated with. A lot of them are debut voices, by the way. We don't look for just a certain kind of name or author. What we also bring to the agency is, because my background is also in marketing, um, we are also very closely involved in the process of either marketing conversations or visibility conversations once the book finds a publisher. And we also do some select brand conversations with a few brands. That's the second part of what the agency does.
It
It's
sounds
been
fantastic, and congratulations once again. It's very, very exciting, and
Thank you.
I think that's why sort of like all of us love books. It's that passion,
Yeah.
which I've not seen sort of for a product. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I've not seen that level of passion for those who love books, for those who work in books. That's sort of unprecedented. Moving on to the reading recommendation section. So, your top books slash movies about dogs.
About dogs. This
Yes.
is part of the thing. I've been thinking about this. So there are two things here. One is that I'm very scared to watch movies about dogs because they make me very emotional. I know that even if the dog is, and this sounds really funny, but there's this website called Does the Dog Die? So every time there is a movie which features a dog, I go up to that website and have a look
That's
because I don't want
hilarious.
to. It is, I know, it is. But I go and check out Does the Dog Die to see whether and if the dog doesn't die, then I'm very relieved. Favorite books? So, of course, I'm going to go with I love. the usual books that everyone will recommend, whether it's Marley and Me, or I thought that was very, very touching. Again, the second half did make me howl. Or it's Call of the Wild, or it's, but there are lots of books which feature dogs not maybe as a central character, but as part of the narrative. And that's why, coming back to the Book of Dog, we called it the Book of Dog because we wanted the dog to be like the central character of the book. The humans are actually supporting parts. But yeah, I will have to think a bit more about what I'd recommend in terms of either books or movies, because I just feel that they are not enough. I think that there should be more narratives around dogs, a lot more narratives around the animals or companion animals in our lives.
I love sort of like seeing these animal documentaries on Netflix, and I'm seeing a lot more books also about
Yeah.
animals coming out recently. So that's very interesting. So since this is also an anthology, what are your favorite anthologies?
My favorite anthologies. So there, of course, is the New Yorker Book of Dogs, which I love. So there was this book, again, not dog related, but there was this book by this writer called Neil Patel, a collection of stories, which was really lovely. It's called If You See Me, Don't Say Hi. That was the last anthology I think I read. And in terms of what I'm reading currently, there is this book which I found, which is one of those unexpected books I came across, which is called Plato and a Platypus Walk into a Bar. And it's actually it's actually looking at concepts of philosophy and sort of demystifying them with jokes and with humor. It's lovely. uh, then I just very late in the day came to Bill Bryson's Short History of Almost Everything. There's this really interesting book that I read called recently called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. uh, it's
I love both Brill Bryson and this maybe you should talk to someone is also fantastic.
It's amazing, the
It's
therapist's
amazing.
memoir. And then there is this book I read by Adam Kay. It's about the first year of a resident in the UK in NHS, medical resident. And it is funny, but it's also very heartbreaking because it just tells you about the difficulties of working in medicine and where all there is a shortfall in Medicare. There are a lot of manuscripts that one reads, so I think the struggle always is finding time to read what. So my guilty pleasure is actually a lot of crime fiction, whether it's Louise Penny or Elizabeth George or even PD James. Sometimes I go back to a PD James, or Susan Hill. I love those kinds of books. So yeah, it's all a mix.
Sort of a little bit out of time, but I can spend another hour with you. I would love to talk to you about editing and your book recommendations and talking about books and how you curate books. This NHS book sounds very interesting. But that's a conversation for another time. So let's move to our rapid fire section.
Oh my god, I'm very bad at these things. Okay.
Okay. So the funniest dog name you have come across?
Idli.
That's a
Uh,
beautiful name.
and I think it was
Idli.
Mahesh Rao who put it up on Twitter saying, "Today I met a dog called Idli," and I think this was about 3 years ago, and I still remember it. I think
Yeah,
it's very
that's a
sweet.
lovely name. Okay, your favorite dog name?
Simba and Custard.
I love Custard. It's so cute.
We have a Rottweiler called Custard.
Oh, that's quite a juxtaposition.
Exactly, that's
Yeah,
why.
that's the point. Yeah. Okay, the one thing all dog parents have in common.
You can never wear black and go out. You'll always have
Mm,
dog hair on you.
true. Okay. Uh, Editor, dog parent, or brand strategy? Which one?
Dog parent, dog parent, dog parent, and then the rest.
Amazing. Okay. What's next for you in terms of books?
I never set out to write a book. I think the Book of Dog was something that I felt I had to do. And I just felt that the time was right, but I don't think that there's another book. I didn't even think there would be this book. But what's there for me, I'm hoping lots of really good books for the agency and personally lots of new dog friends that I will make.
Great. Okay. Last few ones. What's the funniest thing you have seen a dog do?
Many funny things. There isn't one, but Jack Sparrow, our crazy boxer, used to go out on walks and then park himself under a tree because he was convinced that if he waited enough, the squirrel would come down and play with him. And this happened every day, and the squirrel
So
never came
cute.
down. So, yeah, that was
That's
quite a
so
funny
cute.
sight.
Yeah. So, what is your favorite fictional dog?
Snoopy. Also because he's a
Okay.
writer as well. I love those Snoopy writing bits that
Yeah.
come up. But also, I mean, I think all my so this is interesting. I think all my favorite fictional dogs are from childhood, whether it's
Hmm.
Snoopy or it's Snowy, or I mean, there's something about those dogs. I remember I read this Enid Blyton book once called Shadow the Sheepdog, and I fell in love with the dog. This is a dog who I think worked with a
Not read that
circus.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Don't remember.
Loved it. So, but
Actually,
yeah,
now I do remember Circus. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was called
Okay.
Shadow the Sheepdog, and I mean, I read it like some 100 years ago, but I still remember that dog. But I think, yeah, I'd say Snoopy.
Snoopy. Okay. Great. Okay, thank you so much. I hope that you do make many more dog friends in your life, as I'm sure
Thank
you
you,
will,
Tara.
and that everybody listening can also make dog friends and also contribute a bit to dogs' lives. I think that's something that I have also started thinking about a lot more after reading your book. Not only to be a better dog parent, but also how to contribute in general. So thank you so much, and please do. I would love to see more photos of your dog. So if you have any photos that we can also put up on social media, that would be great.
Wonderful. I'm the kind of person who takes out photos and then can't stop showing them, and the other person's eyes glaze over, but I'm still
Yeah, me
showing
too.
photos. So, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm like a
be,
paparazzi for my dog. So
yeah, yeah, paparazzi.
yeah, paparazzi.
Be careful what you're asking for. You'll be
Yes.
inundated with photos now, but yeah,
Please
sure.
give some. But thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
That conversation makes me really want to curate an anthology, speaking to another editor, speaking to another dog lover, and also being an editor, knowing the difference between, something that could be amazing, that's a good story, knowing how to curate. These are some things that I'm really passionate about. So who knows, I might just put out a call for an anthology soon. So keep your eyes and your ears open on our social media. We are at Bound India on all of our social media handles. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is my first conversation with another dog lover. It's also a solo conversation because, I have a pet. I really wanted to connect with Hemali in that way. As usual, please do share your own pet stories with me. I would love to feature them on our blog, Jotted. So you can write to me at connect@boundindia.com. And we'll be back next Wednesday with another really amazing episode. Thank you, everybody.